Hello, brothers and sisters. Today we're going to be reflecting upon Jesus, the compassionate Redeemer. Mark's Gospel is the first written during the reign of Emperor Nero. It's the shortest of all the Gospel accounts, consisting of just 16 chapters. There's very little teaching in Mark's Gospel, nor are there long monologues prevalent in John's account. What we have instead is constant action, just one deed after another that are precisely described. But in today's gospel, Mark does give us insight in a laser-focused way into Jesus's inner state. We hear, when he disembarked and saw the vast crowd, his heart was moved with pity for them, for they were like sheep without a shepherd. Such insights are comparatively rare, and we can miss their import. His heart was moved with pity for them. This is in kind of an artful translation of the Greek term splagnizomai, which means something visceral like guts or bowels. When Jesus saw the crowds, he was moved deep down in his guts. By using this word, Mark is making a connection with Jesus and the God of Israel, whose mercy is regularly described in the Old Testament in this way. Interestingly, the Hebrew term for this notion is rahamim, and that's related to the womb and love. So not surprisingly, the term used with reference to motherhood is pointedly contained when we hear from the prophet Hosea, who refers to God in very maternal terms. We hear, when Israel was a child, I loved him. Out of Egypt, I called my son. The more I called them, the further they went from me, sacrificing to the Baals and burning incense to idols. Yet it was I who taught Ephraim to walk, who took them into my arms. I drew them with human cords, with bands of love. I fostered them like one who raises an infant to his cheek. So the feeling that Jesus is experiencing is similar to that of a mother responding to her infant child's hunger or cry of pain. Now, keep in mind that this episode occurred shortly after Jesus had suffered two heartbreaking setbacks. First, he was rejected in his hometown of Nazareth. And shortly after, his cousin John the Baptist was executed by King Herod. Now, putting yourself in Jesus's place, one could be excused of becoming discouraged or wondering whether this whole enterprise was worth it. But at that moment, the Father responds with a flash of insight. The setbacks are temporary, but the shepherding mission continues, which we hear in our first reading from Jeremiah. At that moment, the vast crowd becomes a metaphor for suffering humanity with its fears, confusions, hopes, thwarted dreams, and continued beatdowns by oppressive forces. This intuitive flash of insight filled Jesus with compassion, and that feeling propelled him to even greater action, culminating in his crucifixion, which he endured because he loves us. People of God, there are going to be times when we get discouraged and whether we wonder whether this whole Catholic thing is worth it. Or we can go through the motions of checking off our duties on our religious to-do list. Such attitudes can generate disregard for others, in which we keep our distance as we go about our affairs. These all too human attitudes generate a malaise that lacks compassion. At this point, what can shake us from these doldrums? If we pause and ask ourselves, have I ever experienced being an object of God's compassion? Have I experienced Jesus loving me like a mother does for her suffering child? If we have that experience, then we know that it's always been preceded and accompanied by mercy. Jesus gazes upon you and his heart is moved with pity, and he takes action on your behalf. When we distance ourselves from Jesus and his love, that's when the wheels start to come off in our lives. We become lost, and life is transformed into one disappointment after another as we become frustrated and discouraged. But when we experience his mercy and we know that he is at our side, we can proceed with our mission as baptized Catholics to deal with our trials and challenges. We can move forward, advancing in love toward God and our neighbor. Jesus has given himself completely and unconditionally for our good. He is an example of love and service for each one of us. So when we gaze upon the vast crowd, may we be moved with pity and compassion. Amen.